All right, welcome to another edition of Elevate Your Grind. This is a 4:20 p.m. Eastern edition. It's 4:20, folks. Let's take a break. Let's have some fun. I've got an amazing guest for you, absolutely amazing guest for you, so much so that I was thinking about doing some reads live here on the show, but I'm so excited to talk to him. I'm getting a little nervous now that we're on air live here because I am a fan of his. I just want to welcome him to the show, so please welcome the co-host of the HotBoxin podcast, the host of the Eben Flow podcast, a co-founder of Athletes for Care, and probably so much more that we're going to learn about today, Eben Britton. Eben, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, brother. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I want to kind of back up to the conversation we had right before we started rolling, right? And, no disrespect, but I found you through the Tyson podcast. And, we just had this conversation 5 seconds ago. And I just, like you said, I'm like, yeah, Mike's got a co-host. He's all right. And then I started listening. I'm like, I kind of like this guy. And then I hit you on social media. I started following you, started seeing the messages and everything else. And the more and more I saw you, the more and more I'm just like, I really like this guy. I want to follow this guy. I want to listen to the things that he has to say. They really affect me in a positive way. And actually, the one thing I didn't tell you, the other person that kind of did that with me was Gary Vee. So I know we all follow him as well. When I first found Gary Vee, I didn't like him at all. And now I love following his stuff. So, I take it for what it's worth. You're in the same vein as him for me. But, dude, I love seeing everything that you're doing. You said you get that a lot, right? or here and there.
I get it's 95% positive, but I do get 5% of people like, who the fuck are you, man? What do you think you're doing with Mike? And you're an idiot and all that shit. So I appreciate it. I must be doing something right if people are interested one way or another.
Well, I can tell you, and I hope, listen, I don't want to upset Mike Tyson because he's one of the baddest men on the planet, but you're kind of like the adult in the room in that conversation. Like, to me, you keep everything on track. You keep the story going. Like, Mike he goes off on a tangent somewhere, and then you have to jump in and be like, okay, let's get, so this is where we were in your story, which is what I love.
Yeah, well, that's kind of my job. Mike gets to take us out to Venus, and then I got to sort of reel us back to Earth. You know what I mean? So that we could keep a conversation on some plane of understandability.
That's really cool, man. And I want to get back into the podcast and everything, but down here in South Florida, we have our group C-Lab. It's our cannabis business group and everything else. And I know that you're a big advocate and everything else. We've actually had Ricky Williams on this show. He's become a friend of mine. So we're all about that. But I kind of want to get back into your story because it's interesting. And I want people to know who you are and where you've come from and kind of what brought you to this place where all the positivity and the hard work and, putting out different podcasts and all the work that you do for advocacy. I think it's great. But, you were an NFL star. And again, you were an offensive lineman. And I played that in high school. And they're the unsung heroes of the NFL, right? You're not going to have that Ricky Williams recognition. I mean, there's maybe one offensive lineman. And I say this because I come from that group, but like Orlando Pace, when it might be the biggest offensive lineman, and people don't know too many outside of them unless it's for their team. But when a team's not playing good, they don't have an offensive line, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly. Your line sucks.
Yeah, Brady can't play because he doesn't have an offensive line. Well, you don't know anyone's name on that line, sir.
Yeah, exactly. It's all good, man. That's part of our code. That's part of the O-line code, man, is to take that take that criticism and just, continue to be the warriors on the field, because that's who we know we are. We're the protectors.
Yeah. So you spent 6 years in the NFL, and tell us a little bit about your experience in the NFL, because I want to put some context behind the advocacy. So everyone, I take for granted that I've done a ton of research on you. I'm a fan, and I know about that. But for the people just finding you, 6 years in the NFL, and dealing with opiates and other drugs, you were on that the Netflix documentary Take Your Pills, talking about your story, and I know you've written about it extensively. Tell us about how you got to this place.
Yeah, good question, man. To kick it off, you know, as many of us did as little kids, I had a dream of playing in the NFL. You know, I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I was at my grandparents' house in Connecticut watching the news, and it was sometime during the summer, and the Jets and the Giants were in training camp, and I remember seeing these highlight clips. They weren't even games yet. It was just guys. It was like Bill Parcells out there and Jim Fossil, and they were out there talking about the training camp, and I remember thinking to myself, God, I want to be one of those gridiron warriors one day, you know? And it was so strong. It was, in many ways, for me, I already saw it as that's the path I need to take to get myself out of this darkness that I was in at that time. You know, my parents were divorced. There's a lot of, my family struggled very heavily with alcoholism and depression and anxiety, and that was very much part of my upbringing, you know, dealing with those things, physical abuse, etc. And so football appeared to me to be a way out. So my mom would never let me play. I was born in New York City, lived there till I was 10, and my mom moved my brother and I out to Los Angeles. And I know, funny enough, she would never let me play football. She always thought I'd get hurt, which she was right to many, you know, to a very, you know, to many people, injury is synonymous with football. You know, it's part of the game. Finally, my freshman year of high school, with the help of my dad, I convinced her to let me play. And from that moment on, it was, you know, it was destiny. It was, you know, the rest is history, as they say. You know, I was surrounded by great people. My coaches, from the time I stepped foot on a football field in high school, they said, Eb, if you do everything right, if you work your ass off, if you do everything you need to do, you're going to be playing on Sundays. You're going to be buying your mom a house. You're going to be buying, you know, all that stuff. And I believed it, you know, and so everything I did from the time I was about 13 years old was in preparation for playing NFL football. You know, everything I ate, how I trained, I was doing, you know, not only all of the workouts and on the field training with the team I was on, but, you know, my mom was dragging my brother and I to yoga classes. She got me a personal trainer. I had the whole deal, you know. She really helped me realize that dream. So, you know, next thing you know, I'm a junior finish my sophomore year of high school, get all the scholarship offers. I choose Arizona, end up going to Arizona basically because I wanted to be a part of bringing back some, you know, some legitimacy to the football program at U of A. They hadn't been to a bowl game in 10 years, and I thought, hey, I'm going to be one of the guys to bring this team back to the bowl game. And they're the only Pac-10 team, now Pac-12 team, to have never been to a Rose Bowl. So I thought, hey, I'd love to get them to their first Rose Bowl. Didn't happen, but we did get to the first bowl game while I was there. Also, they had
that's an awesome mentality to have as a lineman, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you know, you're not like the running back or the receivers that get all the glory, but you keep people off the quarterback, you're going to get them to the Rose Bowl. I mean, it's crazy. I can tell you the linemen that I played with didn't think that way. And that's the reason why we're interviewing you, having been in the NFL.
Yeah. You know, it was part of who, I guess, just it's part of who I am as a leader. You know, I was born a leader, you know, and I was always team captain. I was always a guy that the coaches looked to set the example for the rest of the team. More on that later when it comes to cannabis. But, you know, so I got to Arizona. My career was still on this trajectory, you know, really because what I've realized in life after football, looking back, is I had the formula for manifestation, which is, you know, you have to first see it in your mind's eye. You have to visualize it and feel it and know it. And that's really what I put into practice. And it's not only about the visualization aspect, but you visualize something so intensely that your brain starts to put your physical body, which is the machine, into action to do the things that you need to do to realize that dream. And so that's what I did. I was already gifted with the physical body. I was, 6'6", 260 pounds as a sophomore in high school. It only grew from there and filled out, and my musculature increased and all that stuff because I was willing to put the work in, So I get to the NFL, and I had realized this dream that I'd had since I was a little kid. And, I was sort of like, now what? Now what do I do? I've gotten to the peak of this mountain, and I had a great rookie year. But pretty quickly after that, my body started to really break down. Shoulder dislocated, my back went out. I had to have shoulder surgery, middle of my second season. In that same time, I had herniated discs in my back, which really just destroyed my lower body quickness and my strength. And, I had sciatic nerve pain running down the entire right side of my body, my right leg into my foot. Couldn't feel my foot on the ground, all that stuff that, just about every guy in the NFL is dealing with.
Let me
surgeries.
I just wanted to interject with something real quick, because this is interesting, and I think you can put a great perspective on it. Is when we're little kids, and like you said, you dreamed of playing in the NFL, and we all do if we played football, or even the people who want to play football. But what they don't tell you, and what I don't think they prepare you for, is the business of the NFL. Yeah. Like when people look at NFL players, they're like, they're so lucky, they're living their dream, this, that, and the other. They don't realize that you just have a really good job, because your job is, your work is, you get to do what you love for a living, but it's still a business. There's still pay negotiations. There's still bonus structures. There's still, you have to show up and perform for what they hired you to do. It's a business. So you talk about your injuries, and I want to keep on that. As fans on ESPN, on everything else, we see, oh, this guy is injury prone. He's injury prone. He can't stay healthy. They're talking about that with like Cam Newton and folks like yourself. Is there a factor of it that it is your job and you have to do whatever you can to be healthy to play, that you're injury prone because you never really recovered? And you just want to keep getting back to the field so you can keep your job. And that's why you're labeled as the injury prone guy.
Absolutely, man. I mean, you never recover. You never recover. If you want to keep playing, you never fully recover, and that's really the truth. And every guy who's playing is playing hurt to some extent. It's just, how badly are you hurt? And it really becomes for me, it was, now I've reached the top of this mountain, and here I am. I have apparently done the thing that I thought would answer all of my problems, and yet I'm maybe the most miserable I've ever been in my whole life.
Yeah.
I have a beautiful wife and a child and the house that people dream of, and in past civilizations, I was living like a king, an emperor. I mean, everything I could have possibly dreamed of was at my fingertips, and yet here I am, spiritually and emotionally miserable, and that's many faceted in itself, and we could go into a whole podcast about that. But that really translates to your physical body and your performance on the field. You become, it's just this cascade effect, and never getting the proper recovery that you need physically. You're on a myriad menu of various prescription pills, whether those are anti-inflammatories like Cataflam and Indocin, or Vioxx. Vioxx and Celebrex, by the time I got to the NFL, were taken off the shelf because they were giving people heart attacks and killing people. But Cataflam and Indocin were just as devastating to your liver and kidneys and your digestive system and all of that stuff. Not to mention the opiates. and these things are handed out, and, it's very prolific, up until maybe my third or fourth year in the league, when I think the Saints were busted for some pill discrepancy. The DEA comes in and does these checks every once in a while, these randomized checks. I don't know how it actually went down, but all of this came. It seems like New Orleans was always sort of at the forefront of these stories, whether it was the Greg Williams and the head hunting on defense, like kill the head, kill the body, all that shit, and as well as the pills. So during my career, there was really this sort of transition in at least them being more aware of the sort of image or the perspective from the outside world on what was going on inside the locker rooms when it came to pills and when it came to, various practices, that every team really did. So for me, dealing with all of those injuries, having surgeries, being prescribed all of these really intense painkillers like Oxycontin and Vicodin, et cetera, those things made me insane. They made me completely insane. And this is mostly what I write about in many of the articles I've published is, for me as an athlete who's in tune with my body and in tune with how things, what I was putting into my body and how those things were making me feel. When I took these painkillers, man, they made me insane. They brought this rage to the surface of my being where, I was on a hair trigger with everyone around me, in a very vulnerable state already where, in some cases after back surgery or after shoulder surgery, I needed my wife, my mother, whoever to help me get my shoes on, to help get me dressed. And yet here I am on a hair trigger with anger and rage, snapping at them for not doing something or, whatever it might be. And I was like, fuck, this is not me. This is not who I am. What is going on here? I could feel my blood pressure just through the roof, pounding in my head. On top of that, waking up 2-3 o'clock in the morning, in chills with cold sweats, a knifing sensation in my gut, these are all the symptoms of pill withdrawal. So being intuitive and being an athlete and being intuitive, cannabis, I always gravitated towards it because I could use it when I came home from this long, stressful day. I could use it to help me recover. I could use it to help me get to sleep. I could use it to help me be with my family, etc., from after that long, stressful day in football. Yeah. So that's, through my NFL career is really where I very much cemented my understanding of cannabis as a therapeutic medicine for athletes like myself going through these, very physical, violent sports.
So this is like, there's so many different ways I want to take this down, but I want to kind of start with your cannabis use, right? Because, I've seen the documentaries, I've heard the stories, and I want to touch on your writing too, because when I was looking you up and looking at your stats, the one that struck out to me the most was not your vertical or your 40, it was your Wonderlic score. Dude, yeah. I mean, I don't know much. I had to look up about the test because I don't know much about it, but everything that I looked up, a 31, which I didn't even know they give it to people outside the NFL, is on par with chemical engineers and chemists and everything else like that. And they say if you times it by 5, it's a good measure of your IQ, which is 155, which is highly gifted. So, not only are you shattering the cannabis stereotype, but you're shattering the offensive lineman stereotype and so much more. But detracting from where I was going, you have all these medications and everything. I think a lot of people, when they discover cannabis, they use it as a drug, if you will. They use it and they smoke as much as they can and they use it to get that escape. But through education and through experience, it turns into a wellness thing for them when they actually figure out how to use it the correct way and how they can use it as wellness. I mean, speaking, and I don't do this often on this show, but speaking from my personal experience, when I first discovered it, I not NFL or anything else. I had a sales job, which was highly stressful, and it was my way to disconnect. But I used it as a drug back then. Fast forward to now with the education, the podcast, being involved in the industry and everything else, there's very much a wellness aspect to it where I have, CBD oils and lotions and tinctures and all that other stuff where you can use it truly as a wellness thing. And it doesn't have to be just smoking a joint every time. When you said that you would come home and use it at night, did you start finding it as a drug? Did it take you some experience and education to get into the wellness component of it?
Absolutely, man. Yeah. I mean, I was functioning very much on gut instinct and intuition at that time. And also this is, 2009 through 2012, specifically in Jacksonville, Florida. There wasn't much access to, all of these amazing cannabis products then.
Oh yeah. I live in Florida, so I'm very familiar with our program down here.
I mean, what's it like now? It's got to be better now.
So the way that they do cannabis in Florida is they force vertical integration, which is okay. Yes. But we only gave out 22 licenses, and only 14 of those licenses are operating right now. And a lot of the content that C-Lab puts out is about our industry down here too. So it's better, and the companies we have are awesome. But I would love to see more people be able to participate.
Is it medical? Is it medical only, or is it adult use? Or
medical only. We have a lawsuit going on here in Florida that actually some of our friends from C-Lab are fighting, and it's to break up vertical integration and get more licenses to let people come in. And, we think it's a good thing because the 14 that are operating, they're established, they're grandfathered in, they're vertical, they're going to be profitable, but let some more smaller players into the game here. So it's all hung up on a single lawsuit at this point.
That's super important work you guys are doing. Super important.
Thank you. No, I get the credit because I'm the one on camera, but it's all the members of C-Lab, the lawyers, and really the advocacy groups down here that are just members of C-Lab, like Normal and Florida for Care and the hemp organizations. So I'll take the credit because I'm on camera, but it's everybody.
Hey, it's teamwork, dude. It's totally teamwork. You're a vital piece of it, man. So at that time, for me, I come from a family that's very full of, like I said, there's a lot of magic and mystics in my family. My first American ancestor is this woman named Mary Bliss Parsons. She came to America in 1638. Her and her husband founded this town, Springfield, Massachusetts, and she was on trial for witchcraft 3 times. And was very much, there's a number of books written about her and during the Salem witch trials and all of that stuff. And she was very much a nature worshiper, and people were very scared of her. All the women in the town thought she was seducing their husbands and fucking, she'd visit people's farms and all the cattle would die. And, take what you want from that.
Yeah.
Some of that is in my DNA, which really always lent me towards this curiosity with plant medicines in particular. And cannabis is sort of the foundational plant medicine. As we have this, as I've come to discover, we have this endocannabinoid system, a whole system in our body that literally interfaces with the chemical compounds of the cannabis plant. And that's why it's got all of these medicinal benefits, etc. So, but at that time, I wasn't really functioning with that type of understanding. I was functioning with, wow, I can come home and I can smoke this plant, because that's what I was doing. I was smoking joints. That's all I had. I found a safe dealer through teammates, at every team that I was on, whether that was in Jacksonville or Chicago. You find a guy who's secure, who's safe. And, I was paying out the ass for an ounce of weed, but, it was all I had access to. And I knew intuitively that this cannabis was helping me recover far beyond what any of these pills I could possibly take was doing. You know, I could smoke some of this cannabis and I could get a full night's sleep. I could wake up the next day feeling recovered and rejuvenated and ready for the grind. That was what was important to me. So going back to my mentality as a leader, as a team captain, I was like, fuck, God forbid a coach or my teammates find out I'm a stoner. You know, that was a horror to me. I kept my cannabis use very private for many years. You know, I didn't want anybody to know. It was something that I basically did alone, you know, until a couple years in, you know, the teammates and the guys that you know are cannabis consumers, you start to gravitate towards each other, and you know, you do the, you know, you gather around the fire, as it is. So for me at that time, it was very intuitive. You know, it wasn't until, so I come out of football, I come out of my NFL career, and in the midst of that too, I don't know how much you care about going into this, but I started using Adderall very heavily as a result of my cognitive decline from all of the subconcussive hits I had taken for the last 10 years.
I mean, it's definitely interesting, and I think it's a great part of your story. I mean, you know, I watched you on the Netflix documentary, and seeing, you know, the one thing that really kind of spoke to me was your wife being so happy that she got the Eben she wanted, that you were doing dishes and taking out the trash and everything else. And it's funny because we look at all the things that we put in our body, and yes, maybe it started out positive for you. So I think, you know, I think that's just as important for anything, because when you look at, you're someone who has had to deal with a lot of outside forces to make you feel normal, between the NFL and then the deterioration from that. And now that you've found something that works well for you and actually helps you thrive, I think it's important to shed light on the other things that you've experienced, because that's, and I'm going off on a tangent myself here, but I think that's the issue, and that's what brings the stigma about with cannabis, is it gets looped in with all these other things, and realistically, people just don't have experience with it, right? So people are inexperienced with it that hear, okay, it's Schedule 1, it's in the same category as these substances that really mess up your life. It must be that bad, and they've never taken it, they've never used it, maybe they've had a bad experience on it. I think a lot of people can learn from someone like you. It's like, listen, I was in the NFL, I had to take this stuff. I know that you were given permission to take Adderall as a therapeutic, right? And that's what led to you ultimately being suspended.
Yeah, so real quick on the Adderall thing. I mean, I came in, it was my second year in the NFL. I'm starting at right tackle. I'm dealing with horrific sciatica pain shooting down my right leg. I can't feel my right foot on the ground. Every day of every week from about the end of July, when this injury happened during during a weight training incident, I was in the training room from about 5:30 in the morning until meetings started, and after practice, to just to get my back and this pain into some level, some manageable level where I could play. At the time, we weren't exactly sure. You know, I didn't necessarily have the time to go and get back surgery. I got a handful of these epidural shots directly into my spinal cord, which did nothing. For anybody out there who's dealing with a herniated disc and your doctor's telling you, let's try an epidural. It does nothing. It does absolutely nothing. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a fucking, on an exploded dam. Like the water is just there's too much force. It's too much.
Yeah.
So I'm managing this. Forget where I was going with that, but Adderall. So it's a Monday night. We're playing the Titans, and I'm basically in a state of survival. You know, I was depressed. I was exhausted mentally and physically from just the constant. I was exhausted. You know, I had to just I had to get myself into a manageable position so that I could start every week. And I'm going to go up against fire breathers, man. The defensive ends in the NFL, they're some of the best athletes in the world, you know. Yeah. And at this time, I was playing against The Titans had a left defensive end lining up over me was this guy Jason Babin, who at that time he was leading the league in sacks. It was like week 6, and he had 9 sacks or something like that. So I was like, I gotta get up for this, man. You know.
Yeah.
So I'm looking around the locker room and I see one of my teammates and I say, "Hey, dude, do you have anything that I can take to get me through this thing? This is the last thing I want to do is literally the last thing I want to do is play in this game because I'm beat to shit at this stage." Yeah. And he's like, "Well, I got Adderall." And I said, "Okay, what's the deal with that? Tell me what is Adderall?" I knew what Adderall was, but I was asking more about what are the sort of external things I need to be aware of so that I don't test positive, basically.
Yeah.
So he says, "Well, you know, if you get a drug test tomorrow, you will test positive for this and you could be suspended. But if you don't, this is out of your system in 24 hours and you can get a therapeutic use exemption from a doctor." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm willing to take the chance because I need it. I got to get through this." So he gives me the Adderall, I take it, and I feel like I'm brought back to life. I talk about this in the Take Your Pills documentary. You know, I felt like I had some life back in my legs. I felt energized mentally. I was inspired. I went out, I played a pretty solid game. And then luckily the next day I was not drug tested. So I went through the process. I went and I got my doctor to say that I needed this as a therapeutic use exemption. And so I could then be prescribed Adderall to start taking it because I had reached this state, you know, my cognitive function, my, you know, thinking capability. I was just in such a fog all the time, you know, whether that was from all of the subconcussive hits or whether that was from, you know, God knows what else. You know, just playing football in itself does enough damage.
Yeah.
So I got on Adderall and it was great for a while. Like I talked about and like my wife talked about in that documentary, it really brought me back to life. It brought me, you know, back in to engage with her and my family. And I was able to come home from a long day and still do things and function. But, you know, I became dependent on it. You know, I couldn't function without it at a certain stage. So finally, years later in Chicago, this is getting crazy, this story, because it's just way more involved in this than I want to talk about. But
no worries,
and I don't mind talking about it. It's just sort of off the topic of what's interesting to me. But so because there's a lot of spiritual chasms that were involved during my football career, you know, and so my last year in Chicago, anyway, my appendix had ruptured. I missed during the bye week. My appendix exploded. I had to have emergency appendectomy. I was stuck in LA because they were sorry, I'm hearing my voice in the background. It's distracting me a little bit.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Turn you down a little.
So I got stuck in LA. I had to have emergency surgery because my high school was retiring my jersey. So I come back to Chicago, and this is kind of what the documentary talks about. I came back to Chicago. I was out of Adderall, but couldn't possibly imagine functioning without it. I went to a teammate who was prescribed Ritalin, thinking that these things were prescribed to treat the same issues, ADHD, etc. I took the Ritalin, got drug tested literally later that day, and ended up getting a positive test months later after the season is over saying that I'm being suspended for 4 games as a result of taking Ritalin instead of Adderall. and the NFLPA was of no help. There was no arguing the case. There was no fighting it, whatever. That's what they said. So there I was, and the universe really was saying, Eb, if you're ready to be done playing football, this is your opportunity, you know. And I was done. I had seen the light at the end of the tunnel that year, and it was a perfect exit for me.
I appreciate you sharing that, man. And that's, you know, I just think it's important so we can talk about I don't want to call it your second act, but the next part of your life. Because remember, I didn't really know you in the NFL. I've become an Eben Britton fan based on what you're doing now, the podcast, the information, the advocacy. It's only to me really cool that you played in the NFL because I'm a football fan, and, you know, there are certain parts of your story that I can relate to. And I know, you know, my friends and I, the damage that 4 years of high school had done to us, and
Totally,
for you playing
man.
at the highest level. So, you know, you get to a point where you have to look at the second part of your life. You have a creative writing degree. You're a very intelligent person from what I can find on the internet. And honestly, listening to all your podcasts and everything else, it makes sense now that you're intelligent because you know so much about science and biology. And when I hear you talk to these very smart people, keeping up with them step by step, I'm like, man, this guy does his research. Really, no, you belong in the same room as them. How do you sit down and approach, you know, the next step in life? Because you're still very young. You know, I think, were you 28 when you retired?
How old am I now? I forget. I think I'm 32.
I actually just looked it up, so I don't want to sound creepy. But I thought I assumed you were like 38. And I'm like, oh, this guy's a little bit older than me. I look up to him. He's really cool. I'm 34. I just turned 34 last week. I didn't realize you were younger than me, which I actually find even cooler now.
I'm 32. I'm 32.
Yeah.
I think. I'll be 33 this year.
Dude, when I listen to you on the podcast and with Mike and everything else, I like you carry yourself so maturely and you sound like you have so much of this world experience that I just assumed you were like somewhere between 38 to like 39, 40. And boy, was you don't look that, but boy, was I wrong just based on how you like talk and carry yourself.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I can't really claim any of that. You know, it's really just that I'm open to the universe and what it has to offer. You know, I can't say that, you know, this is my fucking genius or anything like that. I'm just literally, I've worked myself into a place where I'm just open to receive the information, you know? And for me, that's what this life after football has become about, man, because I came out of my NFL career and I thought I was going to be a writer. You know, I thought it was just going to be really simple and really easy. And here you go, Eb. It's time to be a writer, you know? And that was, to some extent, that was true. But, you know, it's much more complex than that. There's a lot of hours in the day. There's a lot of time. There's a lot of healing that has to take place, you know? So at some point it came down, you know, I knew I was done. I was really ready to be done playing football after my last year in Jacksonville, but I had a couple conversations, one with my teammate Brad Meester, who was a 10+ year veteran. He ended up playing 14 years for the Jags. He said, Eb, hey man, every year I'm telling myself this is my last year, you know, but I give it one more shot every year just to see. And if I find myself loving it, then I do it. If not, I know I gave it all I had, you know? So because of a conversation I had with Brad is really the reason I gave free agency a shot and signing with the Bears a shot, because I thought, hey, you know, as devastated as I am, as sick of this game as I am, you know, a comment on the business of football. You know, I was a guy, the team was my family, the coaches were my father figures. You know, these were my people. My whole life was about taking care of these guys, doing everything I could, holding up my end of the bargain. You know, and sometime during my last year in Jacksonville, that was really, I was really crushed I was benched following a really what was a low high ankle sprain that I never was able to recover from. And they benched me and wouldn't explain to me why. My job was just, and all the fucking work and busting my ass to get back that year. And we had a new head coach, this guy, Mike Malarkey, who, you know, I probably still have some healing to do around Mike, but in my opinion, he wasted an entire year of everyone's life there. We went, I don't know, 1-15. It was an abysmal season, you know, and just his whole philosophy around the game really destroyed a team that Jack Del Rio had worked a long time to build. That was a solid team that had some potential.
Yeah.
It was never fully realized. And that is what it is. It's all meant to be, obviously. But so that was all shattered through that last year in Jacksonville, you know, seeing the business of the game. I was an aging veteran who had, like you said, had sort of taken on this label of being injury prone. And, you know, they were looking for a younger, cheaper body to throw in the starting lineup. You know, they weren't looking to, you know, pay me the money that the minimum that required to keep me there, you know. So, and that's part of the business of football, you know, and that's a very ugly side of the game that as a young guy you see a lot of the vets going through, and you don't really understand it until you're in it, you know. And so I had that experience. So, you know, after that, I went into free agency after that last year in Jacksonville, ended up signing with the Bears, had a really beautiful season with them. We were one game away from the playoffs. Our offense was record setting. I carved out a really awesome position for myself as this sort of swing tackle, but also monster tight end. So I came in, you know, 25 to 30 snaps a game. And the Chicago Tribune wrote this whole incredible article on how every time I came into the game, our offensive production went up by 20+%. It was pretty badass.
Well, that's cool.
So I felt like I did everything I had to do, came back for that second year in Chicago, and it all fell to shit, man. And really as a result of everybody's ego, you know, it's all ego is the death of the athlete and anyone in sports, really.
Yeah.
You know, when it becomes about something other than the hard work and the love of the game, it all starts to fall apart, you know. And for whatever reason, that second year, the work wasn't being put in. We weren't installing plays the same. Coaches were taking a lot for granted, you know, which is a big problem in this world we live in, is that people take everything for granted, you know, and you can never do that, because the moment you start taking it for granted, shit just starts to come loose and come undone. So I really was ready to be done with football, and I was ready to move on. I had always had this idea that when I was done with football, I was going to be a writer, you know, going back to majoring in creative writing at Arizona. That's one of the other reasons I picked Arizona over all the other schools. And I kept this stack of journals of my experience playing football from my first year in college to my last year in the NFL. And my wife goes, Eb, it's time to write the book, dude. You're done playing. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. You know, so my football agent hands me off to a literary agent. I start going down this rabbit hole of putting together a book proposal, send it off to a bunch of publishers. There was a lot of interest. They thought it was great, but really, you know, at the end of the day, they had either filled their, you know, very small sports book quota for the year, or they wanted like a red carpet Tom Brady, Peyton Manning superstar story, you know, and that just wasn't really my story. My story was the Charles Bukowski of offensive linemen. You know, it was very dirty and grungy and, you know, an everyday look at the O lineman's experience, you know. And that was fine, but that turned into this article that I wrote for sportsillustrated.com. They have an editorial section called The Cauldron that's all by athletes, for athletes. And so I wrote this article about my experience with injuries, pills, Adderall, cannabis, etc., and sort of the reality of the behind the scenes mechanism that is an NFL training room and sort of medical system. That piece got a lot of attention. And the next thing I know, I'm sort of talking about cannabis and football. And I got a call from a guy who was always a hero of mine, who he had the same agent. My agent said, Eb, this guy wants to connect with you. His name's Kyle Turley. And you talk about, for me, Kyle Turley was, my hero growing up. He was the guy that I wanted to be. Very famous for throwing the helmet into the stands for protecting his quarterback, which is pretty awesome. He kind of hates it every time that gets brought up. But I'm like, dude, it's heroic to me. It's legendary. This is what offensive linemen live for, these moments of heroism. So Kyle, along with, Ricky Williams was very much the face of cannabis in the NFL, right? As a guy who was not willing to sacrifice his own moral code, his own personal code of truth of, watching what these pills were doing to guys and saying, no, I'm going to use cannabis. I don't care if I get tested, but I'm going to use it because I know it's better for me than the alternative, which is the absolute truth. Kyle had really become the tip of the spear in the movement for, retired players or former players pushing this cannabis as medicine for NFL players movement. So Kyle calls me up and he says, Eb, I'm heading out to Phoenix to a convention, and I'm putting together a panel. I would love to have you there to tell your story about your career and your experience with cannabis if you're interested. And at the time, I didn't have a whole lot going on. I was really sort of in the depths of despair, trying to figure out who the fuck I am in life after football. I don't know what I'm doing. Money's running out. My wife is freaking out about how we're going to pay the bills. At the same time, she's building her own business. Thank God. I mean, my wife is a total warrior woman, and I would not be here without her. It has to be said. She's an estate planning attorney here in LA who I've watched her build her business from scratch, since we left the league, and it's been super inspiring. And thank God she's become super successful, because otherwise I don't know what the fuck we'd be doing. I'd be homeless probably. But
oh man, it sounds like you've got a good one there.
Absolutely, man. So I'm freaking out. I don't know who I am. I'm getting the questions of, you're so young. Why are you done playing in the NFL? Why'd you retire? Why are you, and there's so much shame and fucking pain and all kinds of shit that I couldn't even wrap my head around yet, But I'm here and I'm trying to figure out as best I can. So I say, yeah, Kyle, I'll meet you in Phoenix. I'll do this convention. So I go there, I share my story. I'm not even really sure what I'm talking about. I know that cannabis really helped me recover during my football career, but I'm not exactly sure why. I'm looking around this room, and that, honestly, I've spoken at a ton of these conventions, at health summits, at Harvard Medical School. I've talked all over the country about cannabis as a therapeutic medicine for athletes. And to be honest, that first convention, the room was filled. There must have been 1,000 people in there. And it was myself, Kyle Turley, Ricky Williams, and Nate Jackson. And after I spoke, Kyle starts talking. And Kyle, he kicks off his segment with talking about our federal government's patent on cannabinoids as neuroprotectants and antioxidants. Mm-hmm. And this just fucking blew my mind. I was like, wait, what? Patent 6,630,507? Our federal government has a patent on cannabinoids, the chemical compounds found in the cannabis plant, as neuroprotectants and antioxidants. So that means they have seen through scientific studies that this stuff not only helps protect the brain from damage, but it can also help the brain heal from damage. And all of my experience came in right in front of me, like in a fucking, just a pearl. Like, it was all so clear. Everything I had been doing, all of the shame I felt about using cannabis throughout my career and doing it in the, you know, in the privacy of my home and feeling bad about it and all this shit, it was evaporated, you know, through this fire of knowledge. I was like, fuck, man, everything I've done is legitimized. You know, everything I've experienced, it's real. It's not just, I'm not just making this up. You know, there's actual science behind my experience. So that really lit this fuse, man. And I was like, you know what? If anything else, my purpose now is to speak my truth and to share my experience with the world. And at the, you know, and in the midst of that, I'm looking around at this room full of, you know, cancer survivors and military veterans and, you know, these children with the various seizure syndromes like Dravet's, and I'm looking around at all these people and who have had a positive, who cannabis has had a positive effect on them in their lives. And I'm like, man, this is so much bigger than me. This is so much bigger than anything I could have possibly imagined. So, you know, that from that moment forward, I really started reading as much as possible, learning as much as possible, understanding everything I possibly could, especially about cannabis as a medicine and how it interacts in our body, and learning about the endocannabinoid system in our body and what that's responsible for. And, you know, man, and it's very intrinsic with who I am. And before deciding to major in creative writing at the time, I've remembered this over the last couple of years. I was thinking about, I wanted to major in kinesiology because I also have this fascination with, like you said, biology and sort of the science of being human. I'm fascinated by it and the mechanisms that keep us running. So, you know, I just became a student, man. I just became a student of life and a student of how to heal myself first and foremost, and then how I can translate that information to others for them to help themselves heal. And that's, you know, basically how I met Mike, you know.
I bet you never thought when you were using cannabis in the shadows back in the day that one day you would be invited to Harvard Medical School to talk about it. I mean, you go from being, you know, using it, having to hide it, not knowing, having to get it from the safe guy, and now you're at one of the top schools in the country educating people on the endocannabinoid system. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a hell of a ride, man. And it keeps going.
So,
you know? And
so you actually,
say, Todd, sorry, on that, you know, on that note, I just have to point out that at the end of the day, I can attribute it to nothing but just continuing to follow my heart and follow my instincts. You know, these were not conscious decisions I ever made, honestly. You know, I followed my heart, I spoke my truth, and that led me to the place I'm in today. You know, I think that's really important to acknowledge.
I think that's crazy because if you look at the trend throughout your life, is it's hard work, right? Hard work got you where you are, and someone instilled that in you when they said, Eb, if you do this and you put the work in, you're going to be playing on Sunday. I feel like you took that energy and that hard work attitude towards your next part. You know, even with the writing, maybe your wife was the one who gave you the kick in the ass and said, hey, you have these journals, start writing. And then I'm sure once you got going on it, you just laser focused on it. You know, I don't think a lot of people know much about your broadcasting career at the beginning, but you were on an NPR station in Jacksonville. You had a radio show. There's another podcast that you did. I don't remember the name of it. Sorry.
Mindful
but
Warrior.
It was about,
Mindful
Are you still
Warrior
doing that one?
turned Caveman Poet Society.
Yeah.
No, that was with my brother Nate Jackson, who played tight end for the Broncos for 6 years. He wrote a New York Times bestseller called Slow Getting Up. It's one of the best all-time football books. I highly recommend it for anyone who's interested in hearing that perspective. And we became good friends at this first conference with Turley and Ricky. And he lived in Venice. I lived in the Valley in LA, and we just started hanging out. And I sort of was going to him as kind of a mentor for my writing career and how to get started as a writer. And we started hanging out. I said, dude, let's start a podcast. Going back to, I was always sort of fascinated in the radio medium. And that started, like you said, I love that you brought that up, but in Jacksonville, I had a show on NPR called The Number 73. And I helped my mom open up a yoga spin studio in Jacksonville Beach. And we would have charity events there. And so at one of these events, somehow, I don't even know how this guy came. His name's Dave. What's Dave's last name? God, I can't fucking remember. But Dave came in. He was the music director of NPR. And he said, Eb, why don't you come by next week when I'm recording, and we'll do a little interview, bring in some music that you like, and I'll do a little segment on the charity event that's coming up. I said, awesome, dude. So I went in there. Cool. I fell in love with it. I fell in love with, being in the lab, with the music and the recording equipment and just being in that chamber, of creativity. So my first show, and through that interview, he said, Eb, I've got a few slots to fill. Would you like your own show? I said, hell yeah, I'd love that. So he showed me, of course. He showed me how to record and to cut and to edit and do all this stuff. I started the Number 73, and that show was basically a compilation. I'd put together playlists of music, and then I'd do readings of whether it was literary excerpts or poems or newspaper clippings, whatever it was to fit a certain theme. And and that was my first foray into radio hosting, which now, it's just podcasting is the most accessible.
Did you have anybody in radio that got you into it, or was it just that experience?
I mean, I'm along with my family's athletic background and our sort of our mysticism, there's a deep lineage of art and appreciation for the arts. My grandmother is Estelle Parsons. She's an Academy Award-winning actress. She won for Bonnie and Clyde in 1967.
That's awesome.
And she's a monster. She's a complete force of nature. She had a play on Broadway that she was acting in right before coronavirus hit. And now, of course, Broadway is shut down until 2021, I guess. But my dad's an artist. He was a D1 basketball player turned painter. So I had a great appreciation for the arts, film, the greats, Orson Welles, and everything he did, and this idea that through radio waves you could sort of seep into people's consciousness. It's just very appealing and interesting to me. So somehow, and I guess through that, doing a lot of interviews, people said, Eb, you have such a good voice. You should do this more. And I fell in love with it. And it was kind of, again, one of those organic following your heart and following your instincts things, and here we are in 2020, and podcasts couldn't be more, interesting and more on the rise.
I couldn't agree with you more, man. And I mean, I grew up in New Jersey, New York area. So I grew up idolizing Howard Stern. So, the original version of this, 2-hour interview, 1-hour interview, whatever it was all him. And then I told you, I think in the email when I reached out to you, it was guys like you and then comedian Brendan Schaub, where I see that you guys were these athletes, you had these first acts, and then all of a sudden, you know, you turn your focus with Brendan being a comedian and you being an advocate and having these podcasts. And just like, I look at guys like you and I'm like, you know, I didn't go the highest level like you did, but I was a creative athlete. You know,
Totally.
I played football in high school, but I also won art awards too, right? Like I like to draw. Dude. And that's where this podcast came from, man. So seeing guys like you do it, and it's funny, I always, fed into that tough male stereotype, thought that's how you had to be, was not a very spiritual person like that. And it was actually, I'll give a lot of the credit to when I met Ricky Williams, talking to him. I got to spend a week out at his house with him and his wife, Linnea, and just hearing him talk and everything else, it kind of started chipping away at it. And that's kind of like when I found you. So this little hole that Ricky chipped in me, you started filling with your podcast. And I'm just like, it just opened me up to, just even if you don't take it, get into it as much as you guys are, just kind of using it as a guide, right? To look into yourself and just be a better person. Like, it's amazing to me when someone tries to trash you on social media and you just share it and say, everyone, this guy needs some love, right? Just go show him some love. He's angry. That I love seeing that. Like, he's not worth your time to go back after him. There's no benefit to him. Make this guy happy.
Well, at the end of the day, the truth is when you've spent at least for me, my whole life has been about healing myself. You recognize when people are in a deep state of pain, and people who are just on social media to talk shit and spread negativity and anger and fear and all of that, they're in an immense amount of pain, man. People in this world, we need pain. You need to drop a weed bomb on the world, man, or a DMT bomb on everybody. Like, everybody needs an ayahuasca trip at this stage.
Oh yeah. I think your co-host Mike said it best. Too many people are getting used to talking shit on social media and not in front of people's faces and getting punched in the face for it, or being disrespectful on social media.
It's so deep and intense, the psychology of the world right now, and much of it, unfortunately, as great of a tool as technology and social media is, where we can connect and we can do this, and you can be literally 3,000 miles away and we can have this awesome conversation. It's really created in my terms, this is the way that it continues to reveal itself to me, is it's created this spiritual chasm in everyone, where we feel this disconnection from our humanity and from each other, and social interaction is so important to our well-being. But then you put a device in between the interaction where someone doesn't have to get that immediate feedback on whatever it is they say, then you sort of create these monsters, because we've got a lot of people who have a lot of healing to do, who have been traumatized, who have been abused, who have been sexually and physically assaulted in their lives and have never worked through any of that trauma. And now you stick them in front of a computer on the internet where they have access and can comment and share all of their ideas and their opinions with the world and say whatever the fuck they want, etc., which I think is great, because I think freedom of speech is also something that we are very, very silently tiptoeing to being disallowed, our freedom of speech in this world. Very few people can even sit and have a conversation about anything right now, and it's a big issue. But man, this is just, and to speak to that, my gravitation towards positivity and towards bringing light to the world, that's who I was in football. I was always sort of the shaman of my teams. I was the guy who lifted the whole team up. I was the one breaking it down. I was the one that guys came to if they needed something, and so now here I am in the real world, and it's a much bigger locker room, but, I'm still here to bring the positivity, to make you laugh, to make you smile, to make your heart sing, to tap you into the truths that, you are unwilling to acknowledge in yourself. And, like you said, Todd, and that's something that's definitely been part of my journey, is, You know, where as a creative spirit, where does your masculinity fit into all that? You know,
Yeah.
but who says you can't be a fucking masculine warrior badass and still be a poet? You know, that's what the Mindful Warrior was really all about. It was about breaking down these ideas that we have to be one thing. A lot of guys, man, some of the most talented dudes I've ever met were in a football locker room.
Yeah.
From all aspects. You know, you talk about Brandon Schaub, you know, and him transitioning his life into being a comedian. I love that guy. You know, I love what he's been able to do. And I think it's really only the reason more guys aren't doing that and transitioning their lives into something creative is because a lot of us are holding on to this identity one way or another of, and what that does is when you identify yourself as any one thing, you immediately create boundaries around yourself and restrictions around yourself of what you can and can't do and who you can and can't be. You know, so there's really, being a human is a limitless opportunity, you know. And just because you played football doesn't mean that you're, you know, you are, you know, rescinded from that truth,
Yeah.
you know. So why
Dude,
not, man? Your ideas matter. Everything you have inside of you matters. It absolutely matters, and it needs to be out there in the world. You're not just a football player or whatever.
dude, this has been an awesome conversation, and I can probably keep going forever. I've kept you for over an hour, and there's one more thing I want to kind of touch on that I'm very interested in, right? You're a husband, you're a father, and you're also a cannabis advocate. And this is a world that I'm starting to navigate myself as well. You know, I have a daughter. She's coming up on 10 months now. I got to look at the day so I know how old she is. Coming up on 10 months. Yours is older than mine. How do you approach this topic with your daughter, if you don't mind talking about that? Because that's something that in the not too distant future that I'm going to have to deal with. And I think it's important, you know, because as much as we advocate for cannabis and how great it is and everything else, I personally don't have any knowledge of, you know, age and the brain development and the effect, positive or negative there, and when can you start using it and all that stuff. You know, if you are, I know there are needs for certain disabilities or anything else, but if you
Yeah,
are, you know, a healthy person, how do we approach this? And is this something that you've dealt with? And I'm sure it's going
absolutely,
to take you a lot longer to get into than we have left, but
man. No, man, it's a great question. It's a really important question. First of all, you know, let it be stated, and I mean, I'm not the, you know, the brainiac who came up with this, but the war on drugs has completely failed. And the mainstream approach to education around substances like cannabis in particular, shoving it in this dark corner, has not inhibited or prevented more kids from using it, etc. In fact, you see in states like early on, states that legalized like Colorado, you saw the teen use going way down because you begin to talk about it in a very adult manner. This is a substance, this is a plant that comes from Mother Earth that needs to be respected. THC probably shouldn't be used by anyone until they're over the age of 18, 19 years old, you know, minimum. Maybe even into your mid 20s. I mean, for women, I think your brain finishes developing around 25. For men, it's not until a few years later. You know, I
my,
mean, I
my,
think
my
my
wife will
brain is,
argue never.
yeah, I think my brain is still developing. Um, so THC is something we have to be very aware of and have a great deal of respect for it. The way I communicate with my daughter about it, and I don't have all the answers, but this is daddy's medicine. You know, this is the medicine
Yeah.
that helps me function and be at my best and remain healthy. You know, it keeps my brain intact. And that's the most important thing when it comes to my life and my relationship with my loved ones. You know, as God, whoever you want to call it, Mother Earth, the universe has provided us with this plant to help us with our various ailments and to keep us well and healthy. And cannabis is one of those plants. So, you know, it's never easy, but when you come at it from a standpoint of this is medicine and this is not, and hey, there's nothing wrong with doing something to enjoy yourself either. But as long as you are educating our young ones from the perspective of having respect for it and understanding this is not a toy, this is medicine, this is used for a greater purpose, I think that we're heading in the right direction. CBD, I think, is fantastic and, should be treated as a vitamin, especially for kids in youth sports, youth football leagues. I mean, CBD should be used by our youth. It's very protective. It does a lot of good things.
This is Ricky's brand.
Yeah. I love Ricky's brand. Real wellness, dude. I love that. Man, as long as we're educating our kids on understanding what it is, I think that we can't go wrong. We can't do any worse than what's been done already. I don't really have a magical answer. It's all about communication. At the end of the day, it's about communicating and talking about these things, bringing them into the light, because that which you put into the darkness compels you to it. And we don't want that. Bring it into the light.
Thank you for that. And I tell you what, I have your email. So as she gets older, I'm going to take advantage of having that and just start asking you, Hey, Eben, I need to have this conversation, man. Guide me through it. So
anytime, dude, hit me up. Let me know.
Dude, this has been absolutely awesome. I want to thank Cynthia for connecting us. She unfortunately had to drop off the podcast due to something going on. She had a tooth thing, and as a joke, I said, "Okay, only if you replace yourself with Eben." And she was nice enough to connect us. So thank her for that. And I think everybody should follow you all over social media because I truly enjoy it. So let's let you tell people where we can find you.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, on Instagram and Twitter are my main feeds. It's at EDS Britton. Those are my first three initials, Eben Daniel Smith Britton. So EDS Britton on Instagram and Twitter. And then also you could check out my website, ebenbritton.com. That's where I put all my writing. You could find all my podcasts, HotBoxin and the Eben Flow. And everything else I'm talking about. I've got a lot of wellness information in regards to meditation, nutrition, and physical movement on there. So check that out as well. I appreciate it, man.
No, dude, it's awesome. And I can't tell you how much I enjoyed having you on the podcast and how much we probably didn't get to. So, maybe at some point we'll have you back and talk more because there's so much that I can talk to you about. This has been absolutely enjoyable. Thank you so much.
Definitely, dude. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thank you at home for watching. Find us on YouTube. Search for Elevate Your Grind. Hit that subscribe button, especially if you like this video. You can find more just like this one. Maybe not as good as people as Eben, but we've got some great guests there. So thank you again, guys. This has been Elevate Your Grind, and we're out.